I'm actually going to start with one of my students' works, which is called Channeling the LA River. This is Daniel Schwartz, and there it is. And what Daniel did is actually something quite similar to what we've been talking about all day. He's taken a certain amount of data about this city, about LA, and then he's used it for his own purposes. He's a media artist, and so what he's done is he's looked at the LA River, and what he decided to do was essentially to straighten it. And the point of straightening it for him was to think about how, if you took this kind of very meandering path and turn it into this linearity, right, that we tend to do, what happens, what kind of deformations happen off on the sides? You really see this as you start to go through downtown LA. And so what he's trying to do is he's really trying to reach all the way down to the ports. And we've been talking about the ports quite a bit today. And this is just a kind of perfect example of how we're really at this intersection of art, design, and inquiry. And I think that Lev's work certainly has been discussed in terms of big data. Lev's work has certainly been discussed in terms of trying to look at social media, but it's also just recently been discussed as it should be, as an art project in and of itself. Randall Packer has a new interview that just came out, a couple of days ago, Lev? Last week on hyperallergenic.com. And I'm going to switch over to... So I'm going to talk about big versus small, so versus to begin with, and then I'm going to switch to width. I want to talk about DH with UH. And then finally I'm going to talk about two, which is the essay to media script. And I'll explain what I mean. First thing I want to start with is I want to talk about sort of where so many of the sort of institutional supports for what's going on in this arena is. And that's this notion that big science finally has a corollary that us in this room can get our hands on, right? Which is big data. And so what's the word I've left out? What's the big word I've left out? Money, right? So big science gets big money, so big data should in fact get big money. And certainly when we look at certain big humanities projects, there is some big money behind that. And absolutely there is a huge demand to look at big data, and looking at big data is incredibly important, and I'm really glad that Lev is doing this, I'm really glad that others are doing this, and I really don't want to do it myself. There's so many things in the university that I truly appreciate that I never, ever want to do myself. So, if we have big DH, right, big digital humanities, we ought to be able to think about what is little digital humanities. And I say that proudly 6'4", right? I'm tall, I'm big. That's why I won't show you. See, I've been covering over, no one can see me on this because it's such a bad angle for a selfie, right? No, really, that's why that's covered over. But I'm really interested in little digital humanities. The kind of digital humanities that one can do with a laptop, that one can do with just a few people as opposed to the kind of big science model. Lev's been working with one of the big science groups, which is Cal IT Squared, out of San Diego. I mean, that has multi-million, $100 million projects running down there. And I've been doing projects within the digital humanities space for a lot less for a long time. And so I guess what I'd like to talk about is not that big digital humanities is bigger and better than little digital humanities, hence that little sign. But in fact, there's some kind of correspondence and a way to go back and forth between the two, between big DH and little DH. And then in fact, the question I offer tonight, because now it is night, right, is that, what is the relationship between big urban humanities and little urban humanities? Do we even have a distinction yet, or are we just like desperately trying to get Mellon funds so that we can do any kind of urban humanities at all? Big DH and big UH, as I said, are like big science, but I'm really interested in how media can also be used for fine-grained and personal analysis of cities that forms a huge part, I think, of what urban humanities will be, and what urban humanities is absolutely 100% drawing upon. We've already had, a discussion of the hero of all little studies, Walter Benjamin, right? I mean, no funding, write a couple of feuilletons, and then go out and wander about and take some notes, put them in a box, and then leave them behind, right? I mean, that's his. He didn't want to do it that way, but sometimes jackboots get in the way. So I'm interested in little DH and little UH. And I have a new book in process. Isn't that a wonderful way of saying a book I haven't written yet? I came up with that as I was sitting in that chair. My new book in process has been little UH and DH. And it's also had some mediated instantiations. I'm really interested in basically what I call the essay as media script. This is the title of the book that I'm working on, City at the Edge of Forever, Los Angeles Beyond the Screen. I mocked this up. Once again, there's a sort of way to force myself to think about it. I am a terrible, crappy book designer, so I will never use something like that. And this is the single ugliest image you'll see this afternoon, but I did that just because I needed something, it's like my vision board. And so what do I mean by an essay as media script? I mean that I'm really interested in this notion that there are new modes of knowledge formation. That's what today is about. So how are those new modes going to happen? I am a veteran of the book is dead dialogues. I won. The book is not dead. But even if it does die, I don't really care about the death of the book. I care about the death of long-form argument. The death of long-form argument is the death of, I think, everything that we care about in this room and in this campus and in this sort of global network of letters and now images that I'm talking about. Right? That in other words, the long-form argumentation, the long-form use of data, the use, and then the molding of that data into argumentation as a way to affect the kind of social change that John was talking about this morning, that then feeds into the creative work that we were hearing about this afternoon. All of these kinds of aspects come together. So I wrote an essay called Gidget on the Couch, Freud, Dora, no, not that Dora, and the Austro-Hungarian Roots of Surfing. I wrote that in The Believer, and sort of naturally it went onto The Believer's website. So that's, I've done a lot of work with K-Dales. When you think of media-specific analysis, no, don't do that. When you think about media-specific analysis, right, you have to think that is different, that a print object and a web object are different. And then that moved into the book Read Hard, which was the selection of essays from the first 5 years of The Believer. And yeah, my name's not on the cover, but the editor did say mine was her favorite. So, okay, just to be clear. And then my favorite kind of remediation of this was the rumpus.com, which is a pretty well-known website within the literary community, took it and then only credited Read Hard the book and said an excerpt from the book, though it had already existed on and did contemporaneously exist online on the Believer's website and had come from a magazine article. So remediation already existed within this when I was lucky enough to get a fellowship from Vectors and USC's Annenberg to turn this into an online video project. And I'm not going to show it. It's easily just do Lunenfeld Vectors or Gidget in Austro-Hungary. Not much pops up besides that for Gidget in Austro-Hungary. But I just wanted to show one image here that I worked with the brilliant designer Dimitri Siegel and a great director, Matt Norris. But one of the things that we did was we tried to create imaginary maps. It turns out modernism doesn't intersect directly with Sunset Boulevard there. But I do feel it does, and certainly the Austro-Hungarian Empire doesn't make it. On your way to Malibu. But what I was interested in doing was I was trying to come up with a way to do long-form argumentation as a kind of documentary form, something obviously, I have a PhD in film and television, I have experience in documentary filmmaking, so that was something I really felt sort of comfortable with. Another essay that I did an iteration, and I see all, so this is iteration video. I did an iteration performance. One of my favorite essays of all time is by David Foster Wallace, a supposedly fun thing I'll never do again. That's performance for me. And I wrote a piece called From Main Street to the Mansion, Walt Disney, Hugh Hefner, and the Transformation of Sex and Death. And I had backup dancers behind me while I was doing the performance of this. Again, a supposedly fun thing I will never do. I'm working right now, remember it's in process. So it was supposed, I had a deadline. Oh, before the conference, I'll finish this essay. Didn't. It's called Riots Going On, Popular Music, State Power, and the Murder of Culture. And it's basically about how the LAPD destroyed the Central Avenue jazz scene in the 1950s. And how just a little more than a decade later, the Sheriff's Department destroyed LA pop, causing the riot on Sunset Strip. I don't know why I don't have the amazing picture of Cher in a fur vest at a riot, but I will include it when I get to that. So those are the two villains, Chief William Parker, who hated miscegenation, and LA County Sheriff Pete Pitchess, who was working for the landowners on Sunset Strip and the mafia, who were running strip clubs, and they couldn't stand that the teenagers preferred to have sex rather than watch sex. And this really cut into their money, and that's why they hired the sheriff. And this is one of those stories about LA that nobody knows, much less that you can link these two things. And I think that LA is, for all that, and I think Norman, yeah, there's Norman. Norman Klein says that, LA is the most photographed and least remembered city in the world, and I think he's right. But I also feel that the story of LA has been told essentially from the perspective of the failed screenwriting. And it goes all the way back to the Day of the Locust. And it is a story that writes, as we were talking, as Ursula was bringing up, it is a story that regularly destroys the city that birthed it. I like it here. I've been here for 26 years. When I first moved here, there was a group called Deny, Disgruntled Ex-New Yorkers. Get it? Deny, Disgruntled Ex-New Yorkers. And they used to meet for pizza and bowling. And I used to think, and I was a New Yorker who was gruntled? I don't know. I was happy. I didn't want to talk about how bad the bagels were here. I'd rather have a bad bagel on the beach than a good bagel on Broadway. That's, honestly, to go through that. So but it took me 25 years to be able to write this book. And I'm really interested in the next iteration. I'll finish this, and then the next thing that I want to do is to create forms for historical markers for Los Angeles. And I was looking at most of you probably know those sort of paddles in Paris. You've seen them, you've walked around them. The French are very good at their own history. And they hired Philippe Starck to design those paddles. And they're called Starck paddles, but I don't like them very much, but I am interested in the fact that they're everywhere. But I'm really interested, if I want to do something on music, I want to do little micro pirate radio transmitters, and I'm already working with a group of designers and sort of urban terrorists to figure out how to do that. And this is essentially where I want to take this project. And I want to keep writing about why I like this city so much. I want to create a connectionist, alternative cultural history. But I also want to do that within a certain context of our urban media. And Lev and I were talking, and one of the things that we came up with was that the urban media of the 19th century is photography, right? The 20th century's urban media is cinema. I maintain in a book I wrote a while back that the TV is a quintessential suburban media. So I'm not going to talk about it. Yeah, I think anyone who heard my question earlier could tell my thoughts on suburbia. And I think that the 21st century has networked social media from Foursquare to Tinder to Snapchat to Facebook. And I'm going to close today by just talking about the difficulties of representation within this space. And I don't know if anybody can see, and I really wanted that to be an indistinct image, but once you see this is one of, if we have one great civic marker, right, it's the Hollywood Walk of Fame in LA. But I'm going to, actually, there's nobody quite the right demographic here, but on Lev's little list it would be like the Bangkok demographic, right? It would be people 12, 14, 18. What's that? That's one of the markers from the Hollywood Walk of Fame. That indicates music. We used to have these things that would come out, and then they'd spin around, and you could see them. You could lift them up and down, right? It's a photograph, right? It's completely unrecognizable at this point, right? As unrecognizable is this. What is that? Is that a strangely skewed mouse? What is that? That's an aerial on top of a thick box. Daddy, why would anyone have a thick box for TV? Right? TVs get thinner and thinner and thinner, and they're placed on your wall. Good luck. Right? What, does anybody even know what this represents? No, but what medium does it represent? Radio. Yeah. You guys are multiples of the demographic I want to ask that question. Sort of. I'm wearing glasses too, don't worry. Right? And then, so this one kind of, this stays perhaps more current, if only because it has the greatest popularity out in the world. Remember that one of the first great multimedia softwares was called Director, because the cinema may be dead, but everybody still wants to be a director and wants to sort of be behind there wearing jodhpurs, right? And that's this. And what is the only representation on the Hollywood Walk of Fame that's still recognizable? It's the most ancient, right? It's the masks of comedy and tragedy, right, for the theater. And I think I'm going to close off with that link back to Athens, with that sort of attempt to show how these, I'm not sure how we ended up transgressing media today, rather than just using it. But this is a conversation that Lev Manovich and I have been having for 25 years, and it's one that we expect to continue for another 25 years. And I think that the mix between digital humanities, urban humanities, environmental humanities, the other humanities that are showing up, popping up on this campus, like medical humanities, I think that one of the things that's happening right now is that people want to be able to have those deep, long-form conversations in new modes, because knowledge formation is what we're interested in, it's what we do. So with that, I'd like to thank you.